Week 10 of the fantasy football season. Here's the top 36 wide receivers. I'm ranking this week number one, Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. So this week, a great matchup for Justin Jefferson. In my opinion, I still think he's the best wide receiver in the league. In the last couple weeks, he's gone over 100 yards. So this week, with a great matchup at the Jaguars. He has a monster game. Once again, number two, Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. So this week, a potential shootout at Houston on Sunday Night Football between these two teams. Amon-Ra, one of the best route runners in the league. Him and Jared Goff locked in once again this season. And Houston, their secondaries had trouble. We saw Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams last week have big games for the New York Jets. And I think Amon-Ra once again rolls and has a good game. Number three, Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. Ja'Marr Chase, one of the best wide receivers in the game. We saw early in the season a big ball game he had versus the Baltimore Ravens. This week, Thursday Night Football, always high-scoring games for the most part. And these two teams, they're going to put points on the board. So Ja'Marr Chase, it wouldn't be surprising to me if he hits over 100 yards and finds the end zone. Number four, A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. He's day-to-day right now with the knee injury is A.J. Brown. But this week, a great matchup at the Dallas Cowboys. Their defense all season long hasn't stopped anyone. I know Micah Parsons possibly could return in this ball game for the Dallas Cowboys. But A.J. Brown, he's a great wide receiver. And this Eagle team, they've really taken off since he returned to the lineup a few weeks ago. Number five, Cooper Kupp of the Los Angeles Rams. This week, a great matchup versus the Miami Dolphins. They can't stop Cooper Kupp, I believe, even if Jalen Ramsey is on him in this ball game. And Cooper Kupp last week is the number one wide receiver with Puka Nacua out of the lineup, 11 catches, over 100 yards. I don't know if we're going to see that same production this week, but this week a favorable matchup. And this Ram team, they're starting to heat up, winning 3 in a row. Number six, Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. D'Amico Ryans, he didn't want to give a definite answer that Collins is going to play, and they're going to take it day by day. But reports came out last week that Nico Collins is going to be ready for Week 10. So this week, a big matchup versus the Lions. This Texan team, they've been reeling a little bit over the last couple weeks here, especially a bad loss at New York last week. So I think if Collins plays, he's been an elite wide receiver before he went down with the hamstring injury. Number seven, Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. So Hill, he's putting up numbers, but not the elite numbers like he was in the 2 games since Tua returned to the lineup. But this week at Los Angeles, indoor game, Monday Night Football, I think Tyreek Hill goes out there and has one of his best games of the season. And this Dolphin team, I know that they're not going to make the playoffs most likely, but Tyreek Hill, he could pop off for a big game anytime as long as Tua is in the lineup. Number 8, Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. So Zay Flowers, he's been moving up the ranking board a lot over the last few weeks. Number 1 target in this passing game for the Ravens. Last week, over 100 yards, found the end zone twice in the blowout victory versus a good defense of the Denver Broncos. And this week, a potential shootout once again between division rival them and the Cincinnati Bengals. So Zay Flowers, like I said, he's the number 1 option. I know they added Deontay Johnson last week in a deal. Still have Mark Andrews there. But Zay Flowers, with his speed and just all the plays they designed for him, he's going to put up a lot of good numbers week in and week out. Number 9, Malik Neighbors of the New York Giants. And Neighbors, he started off the last few weeks, those ball games slow, but he's finishing in that 14 to 17 point range in PPR leagues. So this week, a good matchup at the Panthers, Munich, Germany. This ball game is going to take place. And usually those overseas ball games are high-scoring ball games for the most part. And to both these teams, 2-7 on the season. So I think Neighbors could go out there once again and have a nice performance. Number 10, Scary Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. Scary Terry and Jaden Daniels, they've been hitting over the last 4 or 5 weeks, making plays. Last week, he found the end zone twice at the New York Giants. And this week, a tougher matchup, no doubt about it, versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. But like I said, McLaurin's locked in with Jaden Daniels. He's a great route runner. And this season, he's been the best quarterback he's played with in his NFL career. Number 11, Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets. So Garrett Wilson, he's been putting up some big games of late for this New York Jet team. And last week, he had a monster performance in the victory versus the Houston Texans. This week, another good matchup indoors at the Arizona Cardinals, where I believe their secondary isn't all that great, even though they won last week 29-9 versus Chicago Bears. So Wilson and Rodgers, the rapport has been building over the last few weeks. And with Devontae Adams there as well, one-on-one coverage Wilson is getting, and he's beating those matchups. Number 12, Puka Nacua of Los Angeles Rams. And Nacua definitely has been banged up all season long. Last week, he was banged up going into the game, and then got ejected early, punching a Seahawk defender in the face. But this week, a good matchup versus the Dolphins, a secondary that can't stop anyone. And Puka Nacua, as long as he's healthy and good to go, I believe he could put up top 12 numbers, because we saw a few weeks ago in his return, he had over 100 yards in that one. Number 13, Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. Smith last week, he was off to a slow start. And then in one drive, he went out there and put on a performance with Devonta Smith. So we know he's a big boom or bust type of wide receiver. But when he booms, he puts up big numbers. And this week at the Dallas Cowboys, a team he's had a lot of success against in his NFL career, I think he could burn the secondary. I know Diggs could be on him at times, but I believe it just doesn't matter. Smith, like I said, one of the best boom or bust guys in the league in deep ball threat. And this week at Dallas, it wouldn't be surprising to me if he catches a long ball for a touchdown. 14, Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons. So he's day-to-day with the hit pointers. London left early in that game versus the Cowboys last week. And this week, a good matchup with the Saints. Obviously, they just traded away Marshawn Lattimore to the Commanders. So their best corner, he's off the team. And it's going to be an easy one. And there's going to be a lot of big plays, I believe, in this game. We saw early in the season, 26-24. Atlanta beat this New Orleans Saints team. And like I said, Drake London, he's a good route runner. Him and Kirk Cousins, their reports definitely build over the last few weeks here. And if he plays, he's a nice borderline top 12 option. 15, CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. So this offense is going to take a hit. Dak Prescott out minimum 4 weeks with a hamstring injury. And the season's over anyway, I believe, for the Cowboys. 3-5. The Eagles are surging. Washington 7-2 on the season. And this week, I know it's a decent matchup versus Philly, where their secondary's definitely been leaky. But with Cooper Rush in there, quarterback, I don't expect huge numbers from Lamb, and that's why he's fell down the rankings this week. 16, Davante Adams of the New York Jets. So last week, he finally had the breakout game for the New York Jets is Davante Adams. This week, a good matchup indoors at the Arizona Cardinals. Well, like I said, their secondary isn't all that great, even though they're leading the NFC West. But Davante Adams and Rodgers, they got the built-in rapport going back to their Green Bay days. And now I think they're starting to get the rust off and get things going. 17, Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars. We know he's banged up, not 100% with the rib injury. And this week, a tougher matchup versus Minnesota, one of the better defenses in the league. But Thomas, he's the number one option, arguably, in this offense. Him or Evan Ingram for this Jacksonville Jaguar team. So this week in a game where I believe they're going to be trailing early and often and have to play catch-up, I think Brian Thomas goes out there and has a good ball game. 18, Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. He hasn't been 100% pretty much the whole season here, is Deebo Samuel. This week, a good matchup at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Their secondary can't stop anyone. We just saw DeAndre Hopkins last week, who was only in his second game and not really up to snuff with that playbook for Kansas City. Go out there over 80 yards and find the end zone twice. So Deebo now is the number one receiver easily with Ayuk out for the season. I think goes out there and is a big game. 19, George Pickens of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So this week, not a great matchup at the Commanders, but his numbers have definitely gone up since Russell Wilson's been inserted into the starting lineup. He is George Pickens. So Pickens, we know he's a deep ball threat. We know he can run the routes. We know he's got that game-breaking speed ability. And this week in a ball game where they know they got to put points on the board at Washington, I think Pickens could go out there, have a good performance. 20, Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts. So Downs, easily the number one wide receiver on this Colt team, in my opinion. Last week, he had a decent game, even though the Colt offense couldn't do anything at the Minnesota Vikings. And this week, they know they got to throw the football a whole lot in a game they're most likely going to be trailing early and often versus the Buffalo Bills. So with Flacco in their quarterback, at least Downs, Pittman, and Pierce, they could have some weeks where they have good games. But easily, in my opinion, Downs is the best fantasy option in the receiving room for Indianapolis. 21, DeAndre Hopkins of the Kansas City Chiefs. So this week, definitely a tough matchup versus the Broncos. I know they got the doors blown off last week, 41-10 versus the Ravens, but the Broncos have played the Chiefs tough over the last few seasons. Like I said, Hopkins, this is only his third game. It's going to be with the Kansas City Chiefs. Well, last week he went out, had a big ball game, and I still believe he has it left in the tank, Hopkins. We saw him make some great catches. We saw he found the end zone twice. And him and Mahomes are starting to get things going quickly. So this week versus Denver, I think he's a decent option, even though Surtain might shadow him a majority of the game. 22, Tank Dell of the Houston Texans. So Tank Dell, he's been good for the most part this season. Now this offense, they're back to where they were last season when Nico Collins returned and Stephon Diggs, unfortunately, out for the year with a torn ACL. And operating as the number one wide receiver last week, Dell went off 6 catches, 126 yards and a touchdown versus the New York Jets. So this week in a potential shootout on Sunday night versus the Lions, I think he goes out there and has another decent ball game with Collins back. If Collins isn't back, would obviously move up the ranks. 23, Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals. So Marvin Harrison, it's been a struggle for him at times this season in his rookie year. One good game, one bad game, and last week was a down game. I believe Trey McBride's the number one option in the passing game for this Arizona Cardinal team. But Marvin Harrison, he's got that big playability, and sometimes it's on Kyler Murray at times where he looks to run some games more than not. Some games he looks for the check down more to Trey McBride. With Marvin Harrison, he's a deep ball threat, but also those intermediate routes he has to run a little bit more. So this week with possibly Sauce Gardner on him in this ball game. I think Harrison is a back-end number 2 receiver. 24 Cortland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. So 2 weeks in a row over 100 yards. I know this week a tough matchup at the Kansas City Chiefs. But pretty much in the passing game, there's no one else but Cortland Sutton, in my opinion. Devon Vele, we haven't seen much out of him. Troy Franklin, Josh Reynolds, obviously he's hurt. He's not coming back anytime soon, I believe, for this Denver Bronco team. And little Jordan Humphrey, he's not really an option in this offense. So like I said, Cortland Sutton, the number 1 option in the passing game. 2 games in a row over 100 yards. And you got to respect that. And this week, I believe he's a number 2 option. 25, Ladd McConkey of Los Angeles Chargers. So McConkey, the last couple weeks, the numbers have been decent. I know Quentin Johnson, he outperformed him last week over 100 yards and found the end zone. But McConkey, I believe, is number 1 option in the passing game for this Charger team. This week, a middle-of-the-pack matchup versus the Tennessee Titans. And McConkey, he can run in the slot, he can run on the outside, and he's a good yard after catch and gadget guy as well. They could use him at times. So this week, back home versus Tennessee, I think he has a decent ball game. 26, Darnell Mooney of the Atlanta Falcons. If London is out in this game, Mooney would move up the ranks. And last week, Darnell Mooney had a good ball game versus the Dallas Cowboys. And we know he's a good speed wide receiver and a deep ball threat and yard after catch play as well. So him and Kirk Cousins have been locked in for many weeks now when making plays. And Darnell Mooney had a weak secondary of the New Orleans Saints indoor ball game on the fast track. I believe he goes out there, has another good performance. 27, Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills. So Shakir is still the number 1 wide receiver in terms of numbers and putting up fantasy points, I believe, for this Buffalo Bills team. Amari Cooper, he's been on the roster a few weeks. Really haven't seen much out of him. And Shakir in the slot, and anything thrown his way, he's pretty much catching over 90 percentile is Khalil Shakir. So he's been a target magnet in this offense. Him and Josh Allen have a good rapport, and he's, I believe, number 1 option in the passing game, in my opinion. 28, Amari Cooper of the Buffalo Bills. Missed last week's game with the wrist injury. We'll see if he plays in this one. But this week, a good matchup at the Indianapolis Colts if he plays in this one. We saw Jefferson obviously go over 130 yards last week versus them, and we saw Addison find the end zone. So I think Amari Cooper, if he plays, this could be a good game for him this week in Indianapolis. 29, DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. So Moore, definitely the stats have taken a big hit for him over the last few weeks. He's failed to reach double-digit fantasy points 3 weeks in a row. He's a good route runner. He's got good hands. But him and Caleb Williams, they're just not connecting. But this week, if it's a time to bounce back and put up numbers, I think DJ Moore could do that versus the New England Patriots. But like I said, I got to temper expectations. What we've seen the last few weeks, 30, Deontay Johnson of the Baltimore Ravens. So Deontay Johnson, they made a deal for him last week. He didn't play much. He was on a snap count. Didn't pick up the playbook. But this week in a division matchup versus the Bengals, I think they're going to throw him out there, and he's going to run a lot of routes and play a lot of snaps as Johnson. So we know he's got good hands. We know he's a good route runner. And we saw this season with Andy Dalton, he was putting up numbers. So imagine with one-on-one coverage and playing with Zay Flowers and Lamar Jackson, the numbers he could put up as the weeks go on and he gets acclimated to the playbook. 31, Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings. So last week, a good game for Addison. I think he's finally 100% healthy coming off the bye week for this Minnesota Viking team, getting refreshed. And last week, he found the end zone in that ball game versus the Indianapolis Colts. And this week, a good matchup at the Jacksonville Jaguars secondary that can't stop anyone. 32, Calvin Ridley of the Tennessee Titans. So Ridley's definitely bounced back over the last couple weeks here with Mason Rudolph in their quarterback. But this week, a tough matchup at the Chargers. Their defense has been suffocating over the last few weeks, getting to the quarterback, creating turnovers, and teams not really putting up total yards. I know last week it was a lousy Cleveland Brown offense that this Charger team went into the dog pound and dominated. But I believe this Tennessee offense isn't all that great. Besides Tony Pollard and Ridley, there's not much going on over there. 33, DeMarcus Robinson of Los Angeles Rams. So we saw this last season in the second half of the year. Robinson starting to break out. And now with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua back in the lineup the last couple weeks here, he's getting one-on-one coverage or even zone coverage where he's roaming down the middle of the field wide open. and making plays. So the last 2 games, 3 touchdowns for Robinson. Him and Stafford have a good rapport going back to last season, like I said. And this week in a beatable matchup versus Miami, I think he could be a decent flex option for owners. 34, Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Giants. Robinson, his numbers have definitely dropped off, obviously, over the last couple weeks, but he's a good underneath route runner, good yard after catch play, in good hands. And this week, a good matchup in Germany at the Carolina Panthers. So I think Robinson is a flex option in PPR leagues, is fine. 35, Xavier Legette of the Carolina Panthers. So Legette, he's been good over the last couple weeks. He's finding the end zone, and he was a first-round pick for a reason. And now with Deontay Johnson and Jonathan Mingo traded away over the last couple weeks, he's the number 1 wide receiver, and Adam Thielen, the 2 operating receivers over there, and Jalen Coker for this Carolina Panther team. So I expect numbers to go up over the next few weeks, the targets to go up. And like I said, they're 2-7 on the season, is this Panther team. They're going nowhere, and you just got to play the youngsters and the rookies. And the 36th and final receiver I'm rankings, Jalen Waddle, the Miami Dolphins. So Waddle, it's been a bad season for him once again. Last year was a down year for the most part. And with 2 out of the lineup, obviously he hasn't done much as Jalen Waddle those weeks. But even the last couple weeks, he hasn't done much. Last week he had 2 catches, -4 yards, a touchdown. I know at the end of the game it was a lateral. He tried to run across the field but couldn't get anywhere, lost 23 yards on it. But besides that, Waddle, he just hasn't done much. The targets haven't been there. And this offense is pretty much built around Tyreek Hill, Devon Achane, and even Jonnu Smith's been targeted a little bit more over the last few weeks here than Waddle. So this week he's a back-end option with hope that he could possibly break out at a mediocre Ram defense. So that's the top 36 receivers I'm ranking for Week 10 of the fantasy football season.